So the Albanese Labor government thinks it's onto a winner today. It dropped stories to the newspapers and then sent Climate and Energy Minister Chris Bowen out to do the morning media, trying to spruik the good news that electricity prices are on the way down. The energy regulator has recommended small increases in some markets, but mainly some small reductions in retail power bills. But Bowen seemed to misinterpret how good this news really was.
What will households get as a reduction?
Well, in New South Wales, if you're on Ausgrid, it's a 3% reduction. If you're on Endeavour, it's a 1.9% reduction. In South
That's
Australia,
not 10%.
I didn't say it was. You did.
OK, so it's hardly a trumpet that you're reducing costs by 1.9% or 3% for households who are struggling under the cost of living pressures.
Well, Carl, as I started this interview with respect, I pointed out that there are ongoing pressures. I pointed out that this is encouraging. I didn't come in here and say this is the finishing line.
Yeah, to understand how pathetic this is, you'd first have to know how much your power bill was. You'd first have to feel the financial pinch when that bill goes up. And you'd have to remember one of Labor's central election promises.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
Yeah, if you're lucky enough to get an electricity bill reduction, and if it's that small, a couple of percent, let's call it what it actually is and say it's just a pause in the price hikes. And if you're lucky enough to get this, it has to be judged in context. And that context, firstly, is Labor's promise to cut prices by $275 a year. So let's look at what's happened since Labor won office. When they arrived, we had a pretty good idea of national electricity pricing because the situation and the trends were contained in the Market Operators Report. It published this document annually, the Residential Electricity Price Trends document for 2021. And in this copy, they detailed average prices right around the nation, and from that we could deduce a national average power price per household. And that national average price in 2021 was $1,645. And then in 2022, the first price rise came. It was 20%, or more than $300 a year. That stung a lot of people. But then the following year, again, prices soared by 20%, and that was a jump of almost $400. So households were then left with an average bill around the country of well over $2,000 a year. Now, these are my calculations, and I'll explain why in just a moment. And I know you don't need me to tell you about the size of these increases because you're feeling them. But the numbers are important because they show that if we compare Labor's rhetoric, their political promises, with what they're delivering, the difference is $1,000 per household per year. So what I've done here is take that national average from 2021 and subtracted the $275 that Labor promised to cut. And that shows we should be paying, on average, about $1,370 a year. But as I just showed you, the current average is more like $2,369. So we're paying almost exactly $1,000 a year more per household for power compared to what Labor promised. No wonder the economy is in some strife. And the Climate Change and Energy Minister expects people to get excited and fall to their knees in gratitude because come this July, those prices might be reduced by 1 or 2%. And he won't even admit his $275 price cut promise has been broken.
Oh, we're not giving up on the plan for cheaper electricity for Australians. Others might, by introducing the most expensive form of energy available in the world, nuclear. We're not giving up on the task at hand, which is getting more renewables into the system to reduce prices and emissions.
Yeah, Bowen's going to keep going with the renewables transition that has pushed up our prices, and he's going to continue to enforce a ban on nuclear, the one form of baseload emissions-free energy available to us, and the option that would use existing transmission networks too. In fact, the energy regulator has underlined how the expanding transmission costs of renewables have impacted on the latest prices. Claire Savage has spoken about varying costs across transmission companies. saying that while wholesale generation markets have stabilised since their peaks in 2022, this easing's been offset by pressures on network prices. She reminds us that poles and wires costs are a large component of retail prices, about 40%. Yeah, the more transmission we build out and the more we have to maintain those poles and wires, the more costs will go up, because all transmission has to produce a regulated return on investment. And get this, Bowen's Renewables dream will include another 28,000 kilometres of transmission lines.
We'll continue with the task at hand. That is getting more renewables into the system, which is the cheapest form of energy available. There are others with alternative ideas about the most expensive form of energy available. That's not the road that we will go down.
Yeah, it seems Bowen would prefer we persist with his failing experiment. I mean, he won't even turn up and debate the nuclear option with the opposition leader.
Well, Peter Dutton might want to turn up at the press club by himself for a change and answer some of your questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty of opportunities for all of us to debate, and perhaps at some of the six sites that Peter Dutton's going to reveal as sites for nuclear power stations. And, he's welcome to do that as soon as he likes. I mean, he can do it today. And then there'll be plenty of opportunities for debates.
Awesome debates at some of the renewable energy sites where communities are up in arms about them. I mean, this is such a low-brow game, isn't it? Especially when the government in Parliament today could not say where it would like to permanently store radioactive waste from the current research nuclear reactor at Lucas Heights, or the waste to be generated in the future by our nuclear-powered submarines.
Part of being a responsible nuclear steward in the context of AUKUS is that we take responsibility for the full nuclear cycle, which includes the disposal of the reactors. We take that very seriously. We have indicated that we will go through an exhaustive process to assess where that will occur. The one statement that we've made to this point in time about where is that it will happen on the current or future defence estate.
Yeah, Labor's caught out arguing against itself on this nuclear debate, isn't it? Wanting to run a scare campaign over nuclear power while trying to argue in favour of nuclear submarines being docked and serviced in our ports.
We are, of course, talking about a nuclear reactor of a size which will power a single machine. That's what we're talking about in terms of the nuclear reactors that are within the submarines. And we understand the sensitivity involved here and the safety that needs to be put in place. These are not nuclear reactors of the size, for example, which would power cities.
Yeah, imagine powering a city. What a problem that would be for a country like ours. Now, this debate's got a long, long way to go, of course, as does the repair of our national electricity grid. But when it comes to costs and the bills that consumers are dealing with right now, have a listen to this tortured logic from Chris Bowen.
I hear this argument, just lift the moratorium and let the market sort it out. The market hasn't sorted it out anywhere in the world. What sorts it out is big transfers of taxpayer wealth from the taxpayer to nuclear developers. We're not doing it. We're not going to do that. So why lift the ban? Because it would send the signal that we might contemplate that, which we're not.
So nuclear would only happen with taxpayers' wealth going to the nuclear developers. Isn't this a description of exactly what Labor has done with the renewable energy sector? The whole renewable energy sector has been underpinned by subsidies, grants and mandates. And all of the infrastructure being developed now at massive cost has to be paid for by consumers, in many cases with regulated rates of return. I showed you last week how Labor paid half the cost, $20 million, for a fleet of electric trucks. We've all seen the legislated mandates for renewable energy. We all know about the solar rebates and the government grants. I mean, this is why investors roll up, because governments underwrite renewables. I think they call it green energy because of the colour of money. If Bowen really believed all his rhetoric, he would repeal the ban on nuclear, scrap all renewables subsidies and the mandates that go with them, and let the market sort it out. And one final point on the calculations of average household cost, that document I showed you at the start that included average household electricity prices state by state, well, it was supposed to be an annual document, but this was the last one back in 2021. At the end of 2022, after Labor won office, the market operator announced that the latest report had been delayed and they'd decided to skip the report for 2022 and promised a new one in mid-2023. But then in mid-2023, it announced that report wouldn't happen at all. Instead, that they would shift to a new form of 10-year forecasting, and that'll come out later this year. This is primarily due to market conditions, including global events that have directly resulted in electricity and fuel price rises. This volatility makes the forecast and analysis less useful. Yeah, maybe less convenient. Well, because prices keep going up now by 20% in 2022 and another 20% in 2023. This means you can't produce the annual pricing report anymore. So consumers continue just to be left in the dark. Let's hope that's not where we all end up.